Hello, and welcome to Lovely English Stories. This story is written for advanced English learners. You can access the PDF transcript of this story and other stories as an all-access Patreon on our new Patreon page. C1, C2 English Story, Moorbeck Hall. As she drove the car along the lane, Olivia's mind was in turmoil. Was she mad to return to Moorbeck Hall? Had she made the correct decision? She didn't know, but as she had travelled this far, the journey may as well be concluded. Driving on, taking the old familiar route, Olivia's thoughts turned to her life 10 years ago and how it had changed after that horrific night. As she steered round the next bend, the sight of her former home caught her unawares, the shock causing her momentarily to lose control of the car. Her heart pounding, she slammed on the brakes, bringing the vehicle to an abrupt stop. She reached for the flask and shakily poured herself a cup of hot, sweet tea to help steady her nerves. Her thoughts again returned to events of a decade ago, and as she recovered her composure, she allowed the memories to wash over her. Olivia's guardians were Jack and Marina Charlesworth. They regarded her as the daughter that nature had denied them. After 9 years of marriage, Aunt Marina had given birth to a son, Lawrence, their only child. When Olivia's parents tragically drowned in a boating accident on the River Thames, her aunt and uncle adopted her. They lavished their love on the daughter they had longed for. Lawrence had been indifferent to her. After embarking on a private boarding school education, he rarely saw Olivia, which suited her very well. Even as a small child, she sensed the hostility he felt towards her. As the years passed, her fears were realized. Always when he came home for the holidays, accidents would happen to her. Was it he who had started the boulder rolling down the cliff, almost injuring her? Was it he who had loosened the stair carpet, causing her to fall and fracture her femur? She didn't know. There was no reason for him to hate her so much. If it wasn't Lawrence engineering these accidents, then who was it? As Olivia remembered her life at Moorbeck Hall, the memory of that night 10 years ago brought to the surface the full horror which, until now, she had blocked from her mind, the recollection being almost too much to bear. The dinner had been served in the small dining room, as was usual when no guests were being entertained. Her Aunt Marina and Uncle Jack were already seated when Olivia entered the room. Lawrence appeared 10 minutes afterwards with some excuse for being late regarding his car. Olivia barely listened as she watched his sly expression. She knew he was lying. She never trusted him, even though he always outwardly appeared courteous, even caring. Olivia was sure that Lawrence was scheming against her. After the meal, Olivia feigned a headache, returning to her room early. She felt uneasy and wanted to mull over her thoughts. Was she being over-imaginative about Lawrence? Surely he did not wish to harm her. As she considered past events, her mind drifted and she fell into a fitful sleep. Olivia awakened suddenly, and, from beneath her room, she heard a muffled cry. Who could it be? Perhaps her mind was playing tricks on her. A cool breeze from the open window made her shiver slightly. She felt she must go downstairs to investigate. She pulled on her robe and started for the door. That cry again! Olivia knew now that she had not imagined it. The sobbing sounded like that of a young girl, but there were no children at Moorbeck Hall. The thought crossed her mind that it could be Lawrence playing some trick on her. As she entered the long, dark hallway, she sensed a presence she could not identify, nor its source. The weeping had appeared to come from the drawing-room. She crept towards the stairs, her fingers white-knuckled as she descended. The drawing-room was immediately opposite. Olivia moved slowly towards the door, her heart pounding as she turned the knob. The door opened. She gasped as sudden terror gripped her for a moment. Afraid now, she entered the room feeling an unfamiliar chill. She drew in a breath sharply when she saw the small figure. It was indeed a child, but not a mortal one. The apparition ceased crying and turned to face Olivia. Numb with terror, it didn't occur to her to shout out. She stood petrified, waiting for the ghost's next movement. Olivia wished now that she had stayed in her room. The spirit moved towards her. As Olivia stood, she realized, to her horror, that the ghost was intending to harm her. She screamed, but no sound came from her mouth. The spectre lunged forward, and Olivia was thrown to the floor. She gave a gasp of horror as the ghost thrust itself upon her. She was going to die. She was sure. Hysteria seized her, and, at last, a tormented cry emitted from her lips. The phantom disappeared. In her distressed state of mind, the high-pitched cries were not recognized as her own. Her release came when she fainted. She awoke with a start. When Olivia opened her eyes, she was relieved to see her aunt and uncle sitting at her bedside. Had she been dreaming? The concerned look on their faces showed that she had not. Her uncle had heard her screams. He had found her collapsed on the floor of the drawing-room. After carrying Olivia back to bed, he had awakened her aunt. They had stayed with her until she regained consciousness. On hearing about the events of a few hours ago, Aunt Marina first comforted her, then began to relay the truth about the apparition. When they were newlywed, to her aunt and uncle's joy, they were given the wonderful news that a baby would be born later that year. However, tragedy followed. The infant, a girl named Annabel, lived only 7 years. She had been a beautiful but delicate child. One evening, after riding her horse for longer than usual, she collapsed at the dining table. When she could not be revived, a doctor was sent for, but he was unable to save her. Her parents were devastated. When Lawrence was born a year later, their grief turned to joy. However, they had never told him of his sister's life. Perhaps now it was time. Lawrence was summoned. He listened attentively to his parents. He felt sympathy for them, but wished that they had not carried the burden of their grief alone. It became clear to them all that the spectre was Annabel. Could it be that she was jealous of Olivia for taking her place in her parents' hearts? It appeared so. That is why she had returned to seek revenge. Suddenly, Olivia realized that all these years she had been wrong about Lawrence. Her brother was not to be blamed for her accidents, but the ghost of Annabel. Olivia must leave Moorbeck Hall. She would stay with relatives for a while and, on completing her studies, would begin a career as a doctor. Now she was back. Her aunt and uncle had both died some time ago. Lawrence was married and living in Somerset. The house now belonged to new tenants. Olivia sat a while longer. Soon she would return to the life that held so much promise. She was to begin a new career in America. Olivia reversed the car, and, as she drove back up the lane, she glanced in the rear-view mirror, catching a reflection of Moorbeck Hall for the last time, and the faint outline of the girl in the drawing-room window. We hope you enjoyed this lovely English story. Thank you for stopping by, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. And if you'd like to have access to PDF transcripts of this and other stories, then join our Patreon community as an all-access Patreon at www.patreon.com/lovely English stories. See you soon.